guess go ahead and introduce yourself, I guess.
Okay, my name is Rusty Coleman, and I'm Caleb's dad.
Alright. So, what inspired you to trace your dad's steps throughout World War II?
Well, it was a curiosity. My dad's name is James Harvey Coleman, and he was with the 899th Tank Destroyer unit in World War II. And they were formed in 1942, and they saw action in 1943, but he did not join them until D-Day in 1944. And he would tell me that he was a veteran of World War II, and so were a lot of people whenever I was a kid, so it didn't really make me that interested at first. But as time went by, I'd ask him questions, but being a veteran, I guess he saw things in wartime he didn't want to talk about. So he was not interested in really saying much. So if I asked him directly, I didn't want to talk about it. And so then he would just volunteer things every now and then. We'd get little bits and pieces of stories. And when you're a kid, you got to remember that, because write it down. It's not written down anywhere. And it's his one first-person experience in the battles. Well, the tank destroyer was used primarily as a weapon of defense. So it had a long, bigger gun than the regular tanks like the Sherman, but it had very thin armor. And its whole purpose was to stop an armored thrust of the enemy. So in this case, it would be the Germans. They weren't always used that way, but in certain places like the Battle of the Bulge, they had a chance to use their guns like that. It wasn't really considered a tank, but it looked like a tank, and it was used like a tank. They call it self-propelled artillery. Well, anyway, Dad said he landed at Omaha Beach. I didn't think much of it. Oh, wow, Dad was on Omaha Beach. And I didn't realize what that meant until later, because his unit was actually supposed to land on Utah Beach, and they did. So Dad's was the only platoon that landed on Omaha Beach. And this is really stuff I didn't really look at until after my father passed away. I wanted to know more about what had happened. And the internet has become quite a resource. I found most everything that I have there, including one book that he brought home from the war that must have been produced while they were in Germany. And that had history in it, but it was kind of like a loose history, loose information. But I used that, and I got after action reports and unit journals, which really were day by day, hour by hour, of everything they did from the time they landed in Normandy to the end of the war. And I also found, shall I say, a guy found me who had information about a relative of his who was in that unit, and wrote a narrative, like a first-person journal in pages that were in the linings of a book. And I thought that was really interesting that they picked out me, but that guy had mentioned my dad's name. So all of these things came together, and I wanted to use that and write a little document about the travels that my dad had, and I used Google Maps, and we pinpointed where he was each day, pretty much. Maybe not him, but his unit. I just find it interesting. I'd like to go there someday and see some of those places. Thankfully, no bullets ever found him, but he was involved in a lot of little battles, but he would just never talk about it. I would imagine he had seen things that he just felt like, as a young kid that I was at the time, it's better off I didn't know about it. But, today, blood and gore is everywhere on the movies, and it's just become a part of life for people. So reading the books that people have written about their experiences, I can only guess that he had gone through a lot of that. So he was there in Normandy. They helped cut off the Cherbourg Peninsula on the 16th of June. they had actually worked with Airborne that took Carentan, 101st Airborne took Carentan early on, but that was accidental because they landed on the wrong beach, Utah Beach. And then they helped cut off Sherbrooke. Then they went to Belgium, and they were caught in the Battle of the Bulge. And that was the two big things I've seen. But I wanted to read up more, and I'm going to find out more about some of the other places he might have gone.
Dang it, I can't remember my other question.
I was trying to think of covering everything I could in a brief period of time.
You really did. Like that actually kind of answered a lot of the questions I was gonna ask.
The narrative that the guy sent me, his name was Richard Guth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Guth, and he had written his diary, as it were, in the margins of a book. That because if they would write stuff home, and my father wrote a lot of V-mails home. This was actually a thing, V-M-A-I-L mail. So they'd get a little sheet of paper, and they would write down something, and they would send it off to be sent back home to parents, relatives. But if they did that, when they did that, they couldn't say where they were or what they were doing, because if it got caught, it could reveal what was going on. So I've got a stack of V-mail in my room over there that, it's really meaningless stuff. I mean, it just stuff he did every day to let the people know he was still alive. And when Mr. Guth wrote in the margins of the book, it's fascinating because although he had limited space, nobody would ever look in that book to see if he was writing anything down. This was books that were given to the people who were going to land on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach during D-Day. It was a book with the margins around the edge of the words, and he would write in there what was happening this day, that day, just a few sentences here and there, but enough to at least let you know that he was thinking about what it was like. For example, taking a whore bath. A whore bath is whenever you can't take a shower, and the only way you can get yourself clean is by using your helmet. Helmets were used for a lot of things. They'd actually dig their holes, their foxholes with a helmet. They'd shovel snow with helmets. They'd shovel dirt with their helmet. Protected them from the sun, the rain, bullets. They would bathe out of it. So they would put water in it, soap and water, and wash the important parts. That's called a whore bath. And he wrote there a lot that he was taking these whore baths. And I remember when my dad got home, he said that when he got home from the war, he was going to take a bath every day for the rest of his life because it was so dirty and stinky and rotten, being unable to bathe when he was in the war. That was one thing he did mention. And he did. He took a shower or a bath every day of his life. How about that for helmets, right?
Yeah. I actually didn't know that they used all that stuff for helmets. Like I know I've seen stuff in movies and stuff, like where they're digging with it, and it's like, well, why don't they have their trench shovel? But I guess if you don't have a trench shovel, I guess your helmet's the next best thing.
Well, they called it a whore bath because you didn't really bathe yourself completely. You just bathed the important parts, And they didn't get, I don't imagine they had toilet paper rations back then. I mean, where would they even put that? So you get dirty and you get stinky, I was reading the thing about by Burgett, who was in 101st Airborne, and when they made their drop into Holland, they were told to put on their Class D uniforms, right? So underneath their jumpsuit, they had a dress outfit, and they wore it for the entire 70 days that they were there. So it just fell apart under their jumpsuit, but they were told to wear it because they were going to have a victory parade once this was over, and they figured it was going to be over like that, That had nothing to do with my dad, I'm just saying. That's some great books. You need to read those. You would really enjoy it. You would see what it's really like.
Concerning following your dad's steps, what was kind of the first, what was the starting point for you following his steps?
Maybe it was the book that he brought home with him. I mean, it really was. It was an unpublished book as far as the greater. Like it wasn't something that would be on the New York Times bestseller list. I guess when they were in Germany after the war was over, they found a factory that made books, and they made these books for the people who were victorious. And so, hey, what about our book about our history of our unit? So it was about the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. I don't know of any other units that ever had books like that. There may have been others, but in this case, it was also sort of a first person narrative from somebody who had helped write that book. And it was a very nice book. It actually, at the end, had a list of all of the people who were in each company. And that's one of the reasons why I found out my father was in Company A. Battalion A. I was like A Battalion, B Battalion, C Battalion, something like that. And he was in the first platoon of Company A. And I guess I messed up. It really should be Company A, B, and C of the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. That's how it would work. So he was in the first platoon of Company A. And one thing about my dad was he always wanted to be the first guy, the top in the front. I remember whenever I was in high school, we played tabletop war games. And I got one called Atlantic Wall. So I spread all the maps out over the table, and we were looking through the counters, and they had the 899th Tank Destroyers. And I said, "Hey, Dad, this is your counter." And he says, "Well, son, when you play this game, make sure to put mine up at the front of the line, you know." Well, the tanks were really used for, those 899 Tank Destroyers were used for defense. So sometimes the offense that they were used for was like artillery. So they would be used with their nice bigger gun to shoot at hard points, strong points that the Germans would have. And in the after-action reports, Dad's tank unit was used in that capacity around Cherbourg. That's another thing that got me interested, was the wargaming aspect of it. I've bought several war games over the years that had the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion in it. And so I always take a little something to mark it off, and I try to put it up in the front line. So Dad, I would say this. When the landings happened and all of their unit went to the Utah Beach, the only LCT that didn't was the one that Dad's tanks were on. So an LCT could handle 5 tanks, some armored cars, and a few other odds and ends. And they were specifically built just to land tanks. And theirs landed on Omaha Beach, but it didn't land on D-Day. It landed on D-Day +2. So they call it like that because it was 2 days after the initial landing, which meant that they landed on the 8th of June. And what had happened was the engine had trouble, and they had to stay out. They couldn't make it to the beach. They had lost pace with all the other landing craft overnight on June the 5th to the 6th. And they finally got their engine fixed and landed on June the 8th, and then they landed on the wrong beach. And they actually had a platoon of an anti-tank platoon of the 327th Airborne. And 327th was part of the 101st Airborne. So they landed with 101st Airborne, and that's when they decided, well, because of where they landed, they would have to go to the rest of the Cherbourg Peninsula from Omaha Beach. And to get there, they had to get there through Carentan, which was a city in France. And it just so happens that the 101st Airborne was actually attacking it from the north. So to have 5 tanks show up with an anti-tank platoon coming from the west or whatever, was kind of a surprise. So they helped out and took Carentan on the 12th of June. And so then they were able to go north towards Cherbourg and join their group. And at that point, they were looked at as fresh troops, so they were immediately given the task of cutting the Cherbourg Peninsula off. So they got their platoon of tanks and some other anti-tank weapons and armored cars, and they went across and cut it off, thus isolating Cherbourg. So it was maybe a minor event in the greater scheme of things, but it was important for their taking of Cherbourg.
Anything else you want to add real quick before we go?
Well, my dad had gone to a reunion in 1976. They all thought he had died because they had not heard from him since the end of the war. And they were all surprised to see him. And I do have a picture, not of him at that reunion, but of one later. So it has all of these guys who were in the 899 tank destroyers in 1977 that they sent him. And in 2005, right after Hurricane Katrina, they actually had another 899 tank destroyer reunion. It was the last one, because most of the people have passed on. And I took video of that with my own camera for the purpose of having it for the future. And I got to meet some of the guys who were with it, but it's a very big battalion, and so they didn't recognize me or him because I looked a lot like him. But it was nice to meet them and see them. That's where I got to that t-shirt, the one without the sleeves. So it was nice to see that those guys were still hanging around, decades after the war. They still got together like a band of brothers, if you will.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Dad.
You're welcome.